So I'm very pleased to be presenting to you a collaborative piece of work, including colleagues from universities and NHS trusts around the UK. So what we're interested in is physical activity in people with rare neurological conditions. And we wanted to explore what interventions have been studied. So we decided to undertake a scoping review of systematic reviews. We know that we should all be engaging in active lifestyles, and we define physical activity as any bodily movement that's produced by the muscles that require us to expend energy. Now, this can be general physical activity, but can also include structured exercise. And we know that for people with neurological disabilities, they're twice as likely to be inactive and have a greater risk of non-communicable diseases, resulting in a 20 to 30% increase of all-cause mortality. Now, in rarer neurological conditions, there's generally a promotion of physical activity, but not necessarily the evidence for this. So we wanted to know, can physical activity maintain physical functioning? Can it increase participation? We were fortunate enough to be funded for a one-year scoping project to actually explore this question. And we worked very closely during this year with a patient and public involvement group. And this included people who live with rare neurological conditions and representatives from some of the charities for these diseases. As a team, we wanted to synthesize the interventions, the nature and the characteristics of them, particularly interventions that aim to change body structure, function, activity and participation. And we were also very interested in the outcome measures that were used to explore efficacy of these interventions. So we decided that we would undertake a scoping review of systematic reviews conducted over a 10-year period. And we used the Joanna Briggs Institute method to do this. So we had two main panels for this work. We had an expert panel who helped us design the review protocol. And we also had a panel of people living with rare conditions and representatives of these charities and support groups. And we followed the Arksey and O'Malley 6 steps in order to conduct the review. And the patient and public involvement group helped us to identify the research question based on their experiences and expectations of physical activity. And then at the end of the process, we worked with both panels at the consultation stage to help us interpret the results and make recommendations. So just to focus in on a few more of those steps in detail, we identified the research question, and then in step 2, we identified some of the relevant studies. So starting off with a preliminary search of keywords, then of the initial abstracts that we extracted, we took the keywords from them and we did another review. Then finally, we did a hand search of all of the reference lists of the selected reviews. For step 3, we selected studies that were full text systematic reviews over our time period. And these had to be of physical activity interventions that included exercise. There had to be at least one outcome measure of body structure, function, activity or participation. And they had to be adults with 6 of the more well-known groups of rare neurological diseases. And these included neuromuscular diseases, motor neurone disease, ataxias, Huntington's disease, atypical Parkinson's, and hereditary spastic paraparesis. And all of the abstracts were screened. 10% of the identified studies were quality checked for inclusion or exclusion by a second reviewer, and then a full text extraction was performed. And with that extraction, we recorded an overview of the main review and study characteristics, and we recorded the following details about the studies: the design, the participants, the outcome measures used, and these we mapped to the ICF framework, and the specifics of the intervention. And we used the FIT framework here for frequency, intensity, time and type, and also the setting of the intervention. And we also recorded the summary of the key findings of the review and the recommendations. So this is our PRISMA flowchart. So initially there were 5,435 identified records, and we sifted through for duplicates, and we then screened the titles and abstracts for inclusion. We then did a full text analysis, and we excluded with the following reasons. The majority of them were because they were conference abstracts or we couldn't get the full text. And then we ended up then with 27 studies that we included in the narrative synthesis. So interestingly, almost all of the reviews that were presented were studies of structured exercise. So as you can see on the diagram, many of them were of muscle strength training, respiratory training, aerobic training, but there was a large group of combined interventions, and these often included the three that are represented here, aerobic or strengthening or respiratory, but also there were some additional interventions such as balance training, gait training, etc. And we can see here that the majority of the studies that were done were in neuromuscular diseases. There were 4 in motor neuron disease, 4 in ataxia, 2 in Huntington's disease, and 2 in PSP. And then some of the conditions didn't have any reviews at all, such as hereditary spastic paraparesis. And while we noted that most of the studies were of structured exercise, there was some inclusion of broader behaviour change and supports interventions, but only as part of the combined interventions in addition to structured exercise. And most of the reviews concluded that the evidence was either low to uncertain level. And this was because of the variation in the combined interventions and the frequency, intensity, time and type of the interventions, and also small sample sizes, which is a problem in rare diseases. With outcome measures, we identified 189 different measures across all of the reviews. Most of them were of body function and then activity, so nearly half of them were of body function. And there was no involvement of stakeholders in the choice of measures. So just to conclude, most of the interventions were actually of structured exercise, but a variety of exercise. There was a large number of outcome measures, but mostly at body structure and body function and activity level. And there were low to uncertain levels of evidence. There's a limited focus on behaviour change and also limited involvement of stakeholders in this work to date. I would just like to thank our patient and public involvement group and the charities who kindly helped us with this work. Thank you.